Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us here tonight. My name is Julie Willis. I'm the Dean at the Faculty of Architecture Building Planning here at the University of Melbourne. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the unceded lands on which we meet, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nations. We pay respects to their elders, past and present, and recognise the deep knowledge, cultural practice and custodianship of country that continues to shape and sustain our communities today. It is my great pleasure to introduce this evening's Dean's Lecture, Archeology of the Future, the third and final Dean's Lecture for our 2025 series. Presented by a visionary architect, Lina Ghotmeh, from the Paris-based discipline Lina Ghotmeh Architecture. This lecture asks us to think about the built environment not simply as a backdrop to our lives, but as a living archive. Each building, each street, each layer of infrastructure tells us something about who we are and who we might become. When we hear the word archaeology, we often imagine ruins or fragments of the past. Tonight, however, we are invited to consider archaeology as forward-looking. What traces are we leaving, intentionally or otherwise, for future generations? Lina's work is celebrated internationally for its sensitivity to memory, material and place, while also being powerfully attuned to the urgencies of the future, sustainability, ecology and the politics of making. Described as archaeology of the future, her practice delves into layers of history, culture and environment in order to imagine new forms of living. Her projects, from the Stone Garden Tower in Beirut to the Serpentine Pavilion in London, exemplify architecture that is both deeply rooted and forward-looking, telling the story of communities while anticipating their needs to come. Lina has held academic roles at Yale, the University of Toronto and Harvard GSD. Her many awards include the 2023 Great Arab Minds Award and the 2020 Schnelling Architecture Award and the 2016 French Architecture Academy's Prix Dijon. We are honoured to have her here in Melbourne to share her ideas and practice with us. Please join me in welcoming Lina Ghotmeh.
Thank you so much, Julie, for this introduction. I'm really happy to be among you today. Thank you for the University of Melbourne, to the Institute of Architects, of Australian Architects, also for the support. And thank you so much, Donald Bates, for all the support. And I've been really meeting wonderful people during this very short stay of 2 days. So I'm really happy to introduce to you my practice, the way we work, and with the methodology of work also behind every architecture that is emerging. And as Julie was introducing, we're really interested in architecture as a process of research that allows us to build a certain symbiosis actually with our environment in a large sense of what the environment could be. And I'm always starting my talks with the view of Earth. And I think as architects, it's really fantastic that we have this opportunity of working in the environment at large, and also to see our home as rather that large sphere that we inhabit. And we are brought actually to live and to work in different contexts. And that's something that is very particular to us as architects. And talking about the way we inhabit our environment, I grew up in Beirut, so this is a photo of Beirut by photographer Joe Kesirwani, and it shows and exemplifies the way we build our environment today on Earth, like this kind of mass of concrete that is invading our natural landscape. And in Beirut, even with this mass of concrete, the sea is constantly bringing beauty, is constantly re-enchanting actually the city with the color and with the beauty of nature. Talking about archaeology, it's something that is very much present also in the city of Beirut. Growing up in that city, I'm always was struck to see that every time a new construction had to emerge after the war, or in renovation, one would really discover that those archaeologies that talk about civilizations, that talk about histories, and that at the same time have all this nature that is like coming through and invading like our history. And sometimes I would walk in the city, and before any construction would happen, would really discover those grounds where we rediscover our history. And unfortunately, those were hidden very quickly because developers wanted to emerge their towers. But for me, they were talking about also how architecture becomes trace again, and almost archaeology as an act of investigating and of bringing together different traces and putting them together to become reality or to rediscover the narratives of our past. But I was thinking also that this is something that brings us into a sense of humility, and if we listen to scientists, they tell us that we are more microbes than we are humans. And the thought that we are in continuity with nature shifts also our perspective to how we build and how we inhabit the environment. So we're always wondering in my practice how much nature in architecture, not necessarily green, but like how architecture really link to its environment, how much it becomes nature and how much it is able to become part of nature at some point in history. So the process is really research-driven, always thinking every time we go into a project, like what is the history of a typology and how to emerge a building rather than have an object that sits in its context. So like this obelisk that we could see sculpted in Egypt that is still like being sculpted, architecture is somehow sculpted from its place and is in the process of making. And it's like an evolutionary process that is not necessarily linear, but that is bringing us to a network of thoughts and of allowing also complexity to be part of the making of architecture. So if we are to position architecture, and this is very particular to our field, we always ask ourselves, what is architecture and what is it that we are doing? I could say that architecture is somehow between archaeology, between the future, between nature and humanity. Architecture because it brings us to understanding our past, to researching, to creating stories, to linking to memory and to earth. Nature because it's the act of nurturing, of ecology, of sustainability, and bringing beauty as part of what we are making, but also a form of art, actually, in the act of architecture. Humanity is about allowing architecture to be inclusive, to talk about society, to talk about humanity, but also the question of craft as being very much present in the act of making, caring for our environment. And the future, because any act of architecture, whether it's renovating existing structure or a new construction, is really about this like projection into something new, original, that excites us, that brings us into a sense of the extraordinary. So the process of making in my studio is really non-linear, and it's always about looking at different concepts and trying to dig into history, working with our hands, with models, really collaboratively, sometimes moving from smaller scales projects like doing a chair to this hangers for a bar that was done for a restaurant in Palais Tokyo in Paris. And really always looking at the work of the hand and how through the work of the hand we bring a sense of humanity and sense of connection really and texture to the environment that connects us also to the spaces that we create. Light is an important element that also generates the atmosphere of a place, and this is something that we are working on in various scales, whether it's a lamp or it's a renovation of an interior. And here we see like this residence for artists that we renovated in Paris. Or like these moments of transition in this residence where we go take the staircase to go to the more like rooms and these intimate spaces, and how light can be a vessel in creating those moods. And light is also a tool to generate space, even when exhibiting this pottery, for example, in Japan for Jean Girel, who is a potter, and revealing this Yohan Tenmuku, which is this ultimate pottery making and glazing. And I like also to think that architecture is almost about cooking, like sometimes bringing glass, casting glass, and then making that part of an interior and allowing this thickness to happen within a chocolate shop that has these massive penguins of chocolate. And then drawing and iterating different models. So really, even if we are working with 3Ds or even today with AI, we're constantly really moving with different mediums to allow ourselves to engage our senses and allow architecture to be as full as possible. One of the projects that could portray this process is, and moving from a smaller scale to a larger one, is the Serpentine Pavilion, which we named À Table. And that was done in 2023 in London. So we're here in front of the gallery, the Serpentine Gallery, and every year the Serpentine Gallery really commissions one architect to build a temporary structure. And when we were given this exercise of how to build a pavilion, it was such a small project, like 300 square meters, but at the same time, really was mind-boggling. What is a pavilion? How can we build a pavilion? What's the history of pavilions? So we started digging into that and trying to iterate thinking through drawing and sketching. And when I was researching the name pavilion, it revealed that actually the word pavilion is coming from the word papillon, which means butterfly, and because it was echoing like a pleated structure that is hanging on very thin columns. And that was also one of the inspirations of the project, that somehow layers of different thinking and emerging that shape that is almost like a pleated structure that is suspended on those very light columns. But also during the research, like looking at different forms, like pavilions were those follies that we could find in parks that were more like observatory spaces. They're always round, they have these colonnades. And they're also like, we are in a park, so it's like full of nature. And if we look at pavilions in other cultures, for example, in Mali, and we can see here those amazing structures that are built actually by the Dogon people in Mali, and they're like heavy roofs with very low structure, and they invite the elderly of the village to sit in and converse together to reach agreements on very difficult questions. And what I found really interesting is that because the pavilion is very low, it invites the conferencees to stay in a non-violent position, because if they want to fight, they would just hit their head. So I thought it's really amazing. Maybe we should make like an assembly of UN where you have this kind of very low roof. But it was also an inspiration for the pavilion to have something that is very low, that you couldn't bump your roof like head because of regulations, but at least it allows this kind of other posture in the space. And also, as we are in London and looking at, maybe historical forms of pavilions in the UK, we started looking at Stonehenge as a place where, like, people were expressing themselves, where it's an assembly of people, but also it's a place that we don't understand yet why it's completely built. Was it to really understand the sky, or what was the actual reason for the Stonehenge, but also its shape as a circular shape was one that really also echoed the Serpentine Pavilion that we proposed, which is more like circular, somehow bringing people around one table. And that table, and this is the title of the project, À Table, was one of the invitation also to bring people together around one like circular table where we could eat, but we could converse, and we could really be together in that place. And it really also allowed a different way of discussing. I did few conferences there. And it was really nice to see that it really changed and shifted the way conferences are made. It was more of a dialogue, where here we're like in a different position, actually, of relationship or like a speech. And that table was also, and the space itself was changing moods as the light and the quality of the light outside was changing during the day. When designing the structure of the roof, we were looking at those forms of papers and leaves that we see in, in the park, and how we can learn really from those structures. So the whole pavilion was built with very simple beams, like wooden beams that are cantilevering, and that are held by 2 columns. And the fact also of building with wood and for a temporary pavilion was really to be able to assemble, disassemble, and to have the least impact on the context and the environment. As all the structure was in lightweight, like very small concrete columns, like boulders, so everything could be removed, no casting of concrete in the place. And the roof itself, to join all this structure, was about really to connect all those different beams, was really inspired by this leaves, or leaves actually, that we find in parks, and where we see that every leaf is formed by the main structure, and then we have secondary structures that hold that leaf together. So really learning from the environment in a deep sense, and trying to think of how it can inform the form that we are putting in that place, and it echoes that context. This is something that we talked about also in the book that was published for the pavilion. And it's really nice to see how this is a place of celebration where people gather, and it really changes its mood. And at night, it looks like more of a carousel that would be more playful, and kids were running around in the pavilion. This was a fun video that was done. So still in wood construction, and here we moved to Japan, in Osaka. I don't know if some of you have visited recently the International Expo, Universal Expo, that is happening at the moment in Japan. And this was a tough experience, really, building in the Osaka Expo, and basically all the constructors were really alien to all the foreign architects and, countries coming and wanting to build their pavilions. And the challenge was, how do you build in a way that really communicates with the local know-how, with the also local craft, and allow also constructors to be part of the making of this pavilion. So if you have seen it, probably, so the whole expo was orchestrated, and the urban plan was imagined by Su Fujimoto, and there's this long ring actually that frames the expo, and our pavilion was this, you can see it in the center, which is the wood construction here. And the pavilion is representing Bahrain. So we can see on the map here, Bahrain is this small circle here, and in Japan, we are more closer to Australia, actually. But I just realized it takes still 14 hours to go to Japan from Australia. And looking at both are really like islands. They're surrounded by sea. So the theme of the sea was really a strong theme that connects both countries. So we wanted really to work with this idea of connecting seas, and the figure of the boat being that figure that really allows the dialogue between both Japan and Bahrain. And namely, if we go to Bahrain and to the capital in Manama, we can see those dough constructions, those traditional dough constructions that are still being made on the seashore. The Do was also very symbolic. It talks about people building boats and history of the Ark of Noah that brought all the animals and the people in the sea. And it's really impressive because it's this kind of work of craftsmanship, of wood, something that, in Japan they're very good at, like working with wood. So when we designed this project, started thinking really how to dialogue with the constructor and how to be able to find a constructor that would be also passionate to build that structure and also push the technology of building with wood even further. So we did different iterations also of this structure. And then we went with this kind of a boat that, it's almost like a boat under construction, and it's all made by pieces of wood that are around 4 meters long. They are unengineered pieces of wood. And the idea was really to dismantle completely the pavilion after the expo, and to be able to use and reuse completely all the materials, so to generate really no waste after the construction. And it was really fantastic because in a way there is no impact, and where we could see some of the pavilion were built in heavy concrete. This one was a light structure, it's not climatized, it's really like a 12 meters wide building and 35 meters length, and it's almost 14 meters high. You would enter into a small space, but takes advantage of the height to generate like a double height volume. And to generate also some interstitial spaces within the whole height of the building. And then to emphasize this idea of the sailing, and there's this kind of plane of water where the water is constantly regenerated and recycled, and it's reflecting those movements that were created by all the wood that constitute the structure itself. And then the skin, actually, of the pavilion becomes also a choreography of light as it changes from different moods of the day. Actually, during construction, I was there. It was super cold, and it was rainy, and the wind was coming in. And so the client was like, okay, this is the drawback of something that is not climatized. We're on a boat, and we're actually in the middle of a storm here. But it's really great that also now in summertime it's naturally ventilated, so you don't have any climatization needed within this place. So when you enter into the pavilion, you have this kind of big hall, and it echoes the the sailboats. And it's really this place that is immersive, where we can learn about the history of Bahrain, its relationship to the sea. And as we see here is this kind of a void here that is created, but also that generates multiple perspectives, allowing also this notion of how do we view one another in different perspectives and in different encounters within that very measured space that we see here. So we're on an upper level, and it also allows it to generate events on the lower ground of the pavilion itself. And in the interstitial spaces around that hall, this is where all the exhibition is happening, and it's all open air. And then there's a smaller restaurant that we could see. Sorry, this one is not. It's just like a short video to show you the mood inside, and these projections. Staying in Japan and still in wood construction, but this time it's a permanent structure. And here we're in Toyama. And it's a project that is part of a larger development that is named Play Earth. And the idea was to build a whole different interventions that allow people to get closer to nature. And we're here in Toyama, so Toyama Prefecture, which is like eastern side of Tokyo, and in Nanto city. And the site is not very far from a lot of traditional constructions that we could see here in Stroh. And it's really this place that is very close to nature. And the whole development is part of a larger territory where we have like an agricultural place that is being revived, a whole landscape that is being done. And the idea was to build an observatory, which is really sitting on the height of that site. It's an observatory of nature that really overlooks all the site, but also allows us to shift perspective in relationship to the place itself, to allow playfulness, and to allow kids really to reconnect with nature and with this environment. And here we can see really some of the sceneries that we can see from the place. And it really, the project itself embodies this idea of the Satoyama in Japan, which is this notion of a sustainable landscape and of building this relationship between us as humans and our natural landscape. And it did remind me of those fantastic animations of Miyazaki, where you could see like living close to nature and this trains traveling next to agricultural lands. And so the question was how to create an observatory that connects us to nature, that talks about what is Satoyama, which is this notion of a village and the mountain and the way people really live with nature. So when we talk about observatories, we started looking at what is an observatory, and here we could see a little bit how we also research in my practice. So digging deeper into what notion and what is the history of observatories. We started to discover actually that in Japan, observatories were really temples that are high up and where you could climb and see your surrounding. But also observatories were imagined as coffins, like as burial structures. And most of the time, actually, observatories were really those more rounder structure that really echo the sky. And this kind of a round form has both a scientific and a symbolic shape to it. So we thought that actually the observatory, which is not a scientific observatory that we will be building, but one that is more of a playful one, has to have this kind of circular form that allows this 360 view to the site, but also echoes notions like the enzo, which is having no beginning and no end, and where things are with no corner, or the notion of dokyo, which is this idea of the infinite, the undefinable, the unbroken perfection, this idea of connecting to the cosmos in a way. And as we are elevating in a place that is surrounded by tree, maybe the observatory itself can be a larger tree that elevates on the site, but also a kind of a tree house where we can climb up and discover other spaces. Showing also the method of work, like moving from ideas and research, we start to do iterations and models, sometimes with very simple materials, like aluminum, just putting it together, putting it inside, using photography to project into, this kind of imaginary world which could provoke the idea of what an observatory can be. And then while designing, I started remembering that moment where I visited the site and I picked up this nut that was this kind of spiky, small nut. And then this idea between the circle and this iteration started shaping that observatory, being this kind of almost like a temple-like structure that is emerging and that has those spikes that looks like a tree that is open up, and working on how the shape can be refined and reworked, and really iterating the movements of those spikes. maybe emphasizing also the centrifugal form of the observatory itself. And then moving from there, the form started to be shaped more closely, and we could see like these different levels where we could move up with the staircase and then discover like different heights, whether we are all the way in the underground, as we see here. Like we start from the underground, discovering really the ground as being the first element that we observe, then the canopy of the trees, and then we are hovering above the canopy of the trees and looking at the site itself. And this is a project that is now starting construction in Toyama. And then from these, observing nature to really being in nature, and that's one of the projects that I started my practice with back in 2006, which was an open competition for an Estonian National Museum. And it was really a unique opportunity, really opening a open competition for doing their national museum. And Estonia is a country that is part of the Baltic states. It was part of the Soviet occupation until 1991. It joined the European Union in 2003. And in 2005, they launched this open competition to do their national museum. And one of the particularities is the museum was to be built in Tartu, which is not the capital, actually, of Estonia, which is more like cultural capital. And starting my practice, at that time, my partnership practice with this project was really about thinking of what a museum could be, and more specifically, like a national museum. How can it, open up identity, not be a place where we close identity, and what is a national identity as such. One of these interesting facts also of this museum was all the collection was really very personal to Estonia, was really collecting objects that talk about their Finno-Ugric influence, talking about also a lot of the Estonians that were deported in Siberia during Soviet occupation. And the site itself really exemplified and talked about that history of Estonia and more tumultuous history, especially that if we look at it, and when we were looking at during the competition, we discovered that the site is crossed by this large platform and this scar that is just cutting in the landscape. And surprisingly enough, they didn't talk about it during competition time. They really assigned this lower part for the construction of the building. And then when we dig into the history, we discovered that this site that is very close to the city center of Tartu was also the place where the first museum institution was established. And it was established in the house of a German noble house. So it was really like this idea of the occupier's house becoming again a museum. But also more specifically, it was a site of a lot of riots. And Estonians, to claim their independence, they were going from Tartu, from Tallinn, and doing this whole manifestation, like following a line and then moving into that site, which was called Radi site. And really that was linked to the presence of this airfield. And we discovered that this is one of the largest ex-military Soviet airfields in the Baltic areas. So having this platform here was evident that the museum could not just be a building that sits independently of its site, that maybe the museum has to play a larger role, that it has to become an urban regenerator or almost like a land art and link to that airfield and become, in a way, a public platform where people could, let's show you this, yeah. So it's really about how to transform that history, how to link the museum into that airfield, but also allow the building to disappear, somehow echoing both a sense of monumentality, but a sense of also disappearance in the landscape itself. And in a way, also, it's about transforming that history and reappropriating it into the realm of the new building that is to be constructed. And that's why also we call this project Memory Field. And in a way, the building is about building memories and reconnecting with the site in a different way. And then the National Museum becomes a place that is open, that can be really open for different interventions, that has also the possibilities of having two entrances, while at one point it connects to the airfield where it becomes open to that landscape. It also allows the public to enter from the southern side. Here from this side, and in a way, through those two entrances, it re-questions how a museum can function. And while it has this monumental shape, when walking inside, it starts to become much more on a smaller scale and echoes those smaller houses that we could find in Tartu, and really bringing this kind of more domestic scale into the scale of the museum. It was really also a great experience to do this building, and starting at the age of 26, really to design this project. I learned that museum is not really about just the exhibition. It's a whole, almost like a micro city of different programs where you have the conservation, you have production sometimes of movies, of books, and it's really this kind of place of work and of producing culture. And the question was, how in this place of cultural production can you allow also for open spaces of encounter, places where people could use the spaces freely? And those were spaces that we always, let's say, discussed with the client about, sometimes you have your clients is like, oh, but these are empty spaces. You don't have to have empty spaces. You have to have only functional spaces. We have to reduce all the waste. But then all those empty spaces or unprogrammed spaces become those where, activities could happen. And this is where culture is produced. And at the end, those were the spaces that we defended that became really the places where songs could happen and manifestation, all while walking in between the exhibition spaces and the collection. And the museum did have different functions. Here we could see the shop where all the also furniture were made by local wood, a library space, a restaurant, and then the building itself was sitting really in that also a landscape that moved from -20 in wintertime to +18 in summertime. And that was something like a new experience for me, like growing up in Beirut and suddenly finding myself in -20, having to, select trees and understanding, climate. But it was also an experience to think about architecture, how it could be more sensitive to its climate, how it could respond to the climate itself. So the whole building was also conceived as a double skin, facade, where we have the triple glazing from inside, and outside is like a gown, where all the facade is knitted with all this pattern that echoes traditional patterns from Estonia. And they're like patterns that many women during occupation time were knitting as a way of resisting the occupation, but also of voicing out their resilience in a way. So this movement also from fabric and knitting to making the building, but also allowing the building to be perceived as a body that is gowned by the same pattern that gowns our own bodies. Just moving with this idea of knitting, actually, it made me think of an exhibition that we just did in Paris for Olga de Amaral. Olga de Amaral is a Colombian artist, and she's a fabric artist. And fabric art has been always associated with women working and knitting, and it has been always thought of as not being art because it's really kind of artisanal work and mainly done a lot by women. And the idea of the exhibition is how do you cast a new perspective on this art, which is really fantastic. And this woman who's 92 have done really these amazing, textiles that looked like that were just like leaves. Actually, here we could see some photos of some of her work where they've put it like on the floor and on the street as if it's like a sidewalk of leaves. And how to exhibit those in a contemporary way and allow a shift of reading to the collection. And the exhibition is to happened actually in Fondation Cartier. So that was the last exhibition that happened in the foundation. That is designed actually by Jean Nouvel in Paris, and now they moved to another space. But it's really fantastic space because it's open to the outside. You have multiplicity of quality of spaces. And when thinking about her work, I started doing those watercolors, thinking about how the textile has to echo in a way also what inspired her in the work, which are all the Colombian landscapes, but also allowing the garden to come into the space, thinking of how to bring an element that talk about the garden, but also do the exhibition without having to build a lot of partitions and waste a lot of material. So, and as I was a bit obsessed with stone that year, I discovered those slate stones. They were like large slate stones in a quarry, and they reminded me also of all the landscapes of Colombian landscape that really inspired also the work of Olga. And then put those slates with the works, her works, and somehow they started grounding and bringing this color tones to the work itself, allowing it to link to the ground, but as well to connect those tones to the outside, to the garden, allowing a certain spatiality, a certain way of moving around into this exhibition. But also linking the work to nature, to the particularity of this slate stone that is very solid but very fritting as a material. It's very fragile as well. And then another part of her work are those brumas, which are these really thin threads that look like colored rain. And here in the second space, the idea was to suspend those brumas and allow almost like it's like a rain of colors in that space, and working with the envelope of that gallery, bringing this kind of mirrored skin that kind of bring in the outside to the inside, emphasizes reflection as well. Moving to the basement in the Fondation, the basement is really generally this kind of enclosed space that is very a bit claustrophobic. But for me, the basement reminded me of moments in Beirut where basements were shelters, were places of cocoons, of really protection at times of instability. And thought about this, one of her work, which is this kind of spiral that talks about life and the spiral of life. And then thought maybe this basement could be this kind of cocooning space where it's about the spiral and where all the work becomes suspended without being hung on against the wall, but they are sculptures by themselves, and they talk through their shadow. And instead of building walls, then they're like light is what creates the separation between the different works. And echoing the process of her work, which is about knitting the fabric, but also painting, and she applies a lot of gesso and material on the textile, bringing on kind of sublime materiality for the fabric. The idea was really to paint the surrounding wall with textures, so we can see it in the photo, but it's really giving also another textural look also for the walls surrounding that exhibition. And then as we move to this cocoon, this like last room is this place where the stelas are exhibited, and those are the most rigid works that she produced, and they echo this park that is in Colombia, that is Saint Augustine Park, that talks that has these figures, these sculptural figures that are standing there, and really allowing this kind of almost cosmos space here where we could sit and experience those stelas. Funnily, from the shape of the stelas, these kind of like almost biscuits that are very rigid, like the shape is also echoing the shape of Stone Garden building, which is like a sculpture, has a sculptural shape in Beirut. And here we're in the context of a city where I grew up. And we see the building, which is a residential building, and also a gallery dedicated to exchange in the Middle East that is sitting in Beirut. And Beirut is a city that is constantly in construction and reconstruction. And we could see here like all the towers, the developers' towers that are emerging, and they are just like growing in and in between we still see those houses that talk about the Ottoman times also of the country and of the city. And when building in Beirut, one questions, the moments of war, but also how do you talk about the memory of the city, and how can a housing project be embedded in that context and really echoes the surrounding rather than becoming another like glass tower. And Beirut is also this kind of intensity of life, despite all the instability. It's a place where life exists in most happiness, and people are constantly partying despite all the events that are constantly happening. In terms of its urban structure, it's constantly written as well. And like this plan that we see of Zarina Hashimi, that it's like erased and rebuilt constantly. And moments also in the city that are really inspiring, where we see nature coming in and invading that fantastic stairs that is going into a traditional house. But also nature exists in a very organic way. It's not tamed. It's not like a park that is cut, or like Place des Vosges in Paris. It's really like just existing in between those informal settlements that we could see. It questions moments of how do we inhabit, how do we build in our environment, and of course that's also it brought in really my questioning of how do we build and with what material, and this idea of like construction is constantly being redone, and there's no kind of conservation also of all those houses that exist. And the site itself is very close to the city center of Beirut. So the city center was destroyed during the war, was constructed and refurbished very quickly, and in a way created an amnesia in relationship to what had happened during the war. It was very kind of a pristine development, and very contested as well. And the few memories of what we have from the city center of Beirut were those photos that were taken by the client, actually, of the site, who is Fouad El-Khouri, who's a photographer, but also with Robert Frank, Joseph Kodaika, and maybe the photos that you may know the most are those of Gabriel Basilico. And they published this book in '92. About Beirut, and we could see the city that is scarred and where the buildings are completely eaten out, but also this materiality actually that is very much present, that really solicits all of your senses. But in the same way that all this construction was weakened and eaten up, the people were looking almost like their environment, and it's striking really to think of how we become our environment in those moments. So when building and thinking about this project here in the middle of all those towers that are rising in Beirut, the question was to build a structure that echoes those moments where the city was eaten up, where it actually is a mass that echoes the construction regulations that are imposed on on our buildscape, and somehow it is shaped like a mass. And when we're opening up within this volume, it's about creating those volumes of life where nature could exist. And it's a structure that is built in concrete, as we are in a seismic zone here in Beirut, and it has to be like a sound structure, but yet it was about using concrete as an element that creates a thermal mass also to the building itself. And as we open, the opening becomes a device. It's not anymore about a window that you look through to the city, but it's a frame to moments of Beirut that portray very specific juxtapositions or urban situations of the city. Makes us, look at it almost like a photography, almost like another work of the client, who's a photographer as well, and also portray the different, almost kaleidoscopic way that Beirut is, that you could see the sea from here, or this massive highway that cuts in the city. Or here we could see the silo. Actually, this is where the explosion happened in 2020. And this is these photos were before the explosion, obviously. They were at the time of construction. And you could see these openings really, they made me think also of moments where visiting those left out buildings where people bring back life into those structures. And then, talking about the building as an emergence, I really wanted that the facade would become a ground and would really solicit the hands of artisans in Beirut, but also that when this window happens, that it's not about a window, it's a loggia, it's a space that is invaded by nature. And maybe we could imagine that within architecture, within our buildscape, nature could also exist in different scales. It could be this small planter or this large tree that has its own presence also in our buildscapes. So the windows started to become also houses and homes for different sizes of landscape and of nature. And as we see it today, it's really growing, and pigeons are living as well here. I don't know if the inhabitants are happy. They're happy. They told me they're happy, but it's, it's part of this also building. And during the process, to develop this finish, it was really an iterative process of making mock-ups, and we drew this kind of comb that is made in metal and combed the whole elevation, almost like it's a ground that is chiseled. So really, this is what we see here. This is this metal comb that we use to comb the whole elevation. It started from the upper levels, moving into the lower levels. It's really a very artisanal way of making the facade. And it all started with these clay models at the studio, really working with clay and with a fork and doing these horizontal shapes. And really meeting the different neighbors with the finish. And what was really interesting was the artisan, the workers were really part of the making of the building. They were really experimenting, and they felt that they were part of the emotional process. So sometimes they would work, we work one day, and then the next day they would come. It's I didn't sleep yesterday. Almost like architects, I was thinking all night about this, and we found how we can make it. So it was really about also how do you build knowledge with the people that are making the architecture on site. You can see here some of the apartments that open up to the outside. So even if it's not a glass tower, the openings are measured to really bring in light, but also to allow this viewing of the outside and still like have a great view to the sea. And some of the windows looked like almost like a painting framed inside, like we see here in this window that looks towards the building outside and the planters. And in a way, with this kind of variation of windows, it was also about, in a way, critiquing and allowing another plan to happen within the city, because generally, you know, when we're working with developers, they come with these plans and they tell you, oh, we want these exact rooms and we want exactly those layouts of spaces. And somehow in the city, you could feel like all the plans look exactly the same. You have an entry, the living room, 3 rooms. So it was really about allowing also like a plans and individual ways of living, reappropriating, allowing also the people who will live within those apartments to reappropriate them and have a distinct way of living in each level of the building. Something that we see here is this is the ground floor with the foundation area, which is an exhibition space. And also the gardens and places was really about connecting these upper spaces to the ground space as well. This is a movie that was taken after the explosion of 2020. Funnily, the building actually stood. The whole structure was intact, all while all the gardens were completely sitting, but of course all the glass was shattered and all the interior of the apartments was completely destroyed. And in a way, as it stood, that explosion, somehow it was a bit of a symbol of resilience for a lot of the Lebanese and citizens, as Beirut is constantly in rebuilding. I really love this photo of Florian Gnituyu, where you could see like this guy just sitting outside with, and it's very Mediterranean. It's this relationship to the outside and the fact of appropriating the public space as being also part of the private space. These were a series of photos that were taken afterwards, after the explosion, but also the economic collapse in Beirut. And it was really particular to see the city in complete darkness, because we had a massive electric cut, actually. And just really seeing all of the buildings as shadows. And this notion of absence of light was really an interesting subject for us, and what drove us also to publish this book, Windows of Light, that you could see also outside. And it also portrays the way we approach research and my practice, where we're always looking at the origin of light and then echoing that into architecture, different forms of construction. So this book was really about looking at, what is light, and being curious to understand, bioluminescent species and mythologies, and understanding really how different cultures understood light, but also how today we are in a pollution of light as well in our environment, and that is contrasting places where we don't have light at all, like in Beirut or other places. So last 2 projects, almost there, moving in here in Normandy. And this is the first low-carbon, energy-positive building in France. And it's a manufacturing building. It's a leather-making building in France. And, industrial places, there are stigmatized places that are like this kind of metal buildings that are built sometimes in amazing landscapes. And here the challenge was how to build a structure that echoes really the leatherwork, the precision of the hand, and also build in a low carbon energy positive way with the local resources. And as we looked at the site, we discovered that there are 3 local artisanal brick makers that are close by the site. And we decided to build with the material that is the most locally available and building again structurally with brick. And thinking about the building, how it could almost like fit within the landscape and be as compact as possible. Because once we think about, sustainable building, it's really about how it could be the least impactful on its site and in a bioclimatic way, already by thinking about the lighting within the space, thinking about the ventilation and the nature as an asset to create shadow and to protect the envelope. We're already really thinking in a much more ecological way, and we were really surprised by these acts. We're already getting closer to the comfort zone of human beings, so to this 23 degrees that we're always seeking. And in a way, it needed the building needed much less climatization and cooling or heating actually to sustain itself. And then we're using all the more sustainable material like wood and the earth of the site to manufacture the bricks, and really working with the local brick makers, and especially that the local brick makers were mainly working with the renovations and not anymore building really structures in brick. So it was about bringing that knowledge back to the contemporary architecture. And we ended up doing these 550,000 bricks by 20 people that were really proud of the making, manufacturing them one by one, and then cooking them to this color that they look almost like violet. And then arriving on site, we discovered that actually there's no more know-how of how do you mason, how do you build again with bricks. So we had to take a master mason that had to also train other masons to building with bricks and caring to this material. One of the things that I found really interesting was they printed the elevations of the drawings, actually, of the project in 1-to-1 scale, and then built on the elevations to really moving to the scale of the drawing into reality. And we could see this kind of pride also of building and making the building brick by brick. So allowing this precision of work, but also with the current possibilities and tools of calculation, we were able to do these very thin arches that span and that almost talk about also the work that is done inside the manufacture, because this is also a place of saddlery making, so it echoes the horse and these gallops of the horse through those arches that echo movement in themselves. One of the things we see here also the site is landscaped with the earth that was excavated, so we didn't move any earth from the site itself, and we reused all the earth to create that landscape. And as the arches are present outside, they are also echoed inside. They echo also the shapes of the saddlers, like the saddles that the artisans are making. So we're constantly in this kind of arch feeling and this kind of continuity of materials. All the materials were very simple that were used. Here we see the acoustic panels, but really trying to use very soft materials to allow this space of making to be more welcoming. And it was really nice because the artisans were telling me that we feel like we're coming to vacation while going to work. And I think it's so important that the spaces where we're working and we're inhabiting are places that allow us joy and pleasure, where we spend a lot of time actually. One of the things of this manufacture was also entering into a garden, so entering into an outside space. So always like, how do we bring nature as part of architecture, as a first place that we encounter before getting into the inside. The project is exhibited at the moment in the Biennale in Venice. And we decided here to show the structure almost like under construction, like a knitted structure actually with the roof. But also inside you could discover the process of making, but also the work that is done within the building itself through those micro screens that are displayed there. Almost like a voyeuristic way also of discovering the work. Just finishing the lecture with the last project that we just won in London, and this is the renovation for the British Museum. It's the Western Range renovation. And it's really also a project that echoes the notion of archaeology, because as all the projects are about research, here we're really digging into the history of the evolution of the building itself and how through time the building got suffocated. As before it had these large courtyards, and bit by bit it kind of became like this kind of enclosed structure that we could see at the end here in this plan. And during the competition, they gave us really specific galleries to design, all while the project scope is all the Western Range, so all what you see here in transparency, but was really about looking at our understanding of the collection, but also how do we assess the space itself, how do we bring breathing spaces. And that was really an amazing journey, because I think one of the particularities of this museum is really how to dig into the history of the world and into this collection and how to portray it through the spaces, but also, of course, talk about all the colonial history and all the difficult subjects that are happening at the moment in terms of reclaiming objects and allowing the building also to become a stage of dialogue and of conversation. And we had to design those 4 spaces around 4 different subjects. One was the battle of Assyria and Lachish. Another was the story of Hornet-Shetif, who's a priest in Egyptian times. And then another one was the mausoleum of Halicarnassus, which is one of the wonders of the world. And the last one is the Lycian building, which was orchestrated around pottery. And the process was really about going deeper into research and understanding all those objects, and that gave way to this kind of, again, research board that dug into the history of every object, but also into what it echoes and what it could be, what could 21st century museum be. So in the first space, that talked about the Assyrian reliefs, but also the Lamassu, which were these guardians of Assyrian palaces. We started looking at how those Lamassus were found and how to echo those gates, but also how to imagine those sculptures exhibited in a way that are not that they would not be embedded in the museum, but they become freestanding, and they would echo their place by this open scaffold, so they could move at any time. And then when moving into another space, which is that of Hornet-Shetif, the priest, Egyptian priest, and looking at his coffin, we looked at the detail of the coffin that is representing the goddess Nut, and the goddess Nut is the goddess that guided actually Hornet-Shetif into the afterlife. But also looked at the place where it was the body was found, the mummy was found with the karnak and these kind of long elevated columns, And somehow the place where we discover Hornetchitiv is a place where his body is revered, and it's this kind of a glass box where we could understand also the interest of scanning the mummies and how the scanning is making us understand really the geography around the body at that time. In the moment where we're discovering Halicarnasses, the mausoleum, which really had different interpretation also of how it existed in the past. We looked at the site, how it exists today in Bodrum, like this open archaeology, and then imagine that we recreate a void inside the museum and remove some of the levels and regenerate that open hole. And this open hole would allow us to understand the scale of the mausoleum itself, all while all the objects remain more not embedded in the structure, and the ground floor would somehow echo the site of Bodrum and how the archaeology exists today. So really talking also about the places where those objects are coming from and how to bring in a dialogue around those objects through the museum itself. Like, for example, here the ground floor became like an educational space. And the last space is one where we reuse the material of demolition that we take from generating that large void, and somehow talk about pottery. And it's this kind of vertical gallery where the pottery is exhibited, but also it's a gallery that allows us multiple perspectives, and that connects really the world through a millennium of pottery space. We could see also the space made of earth and of the reuse of the material that was generated by the demolition. And without any music, last breakdance. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Lina, for that fascinating presentation. I'd like to now invite Stephanie Bullock, Director at Koslov Architecture and current Victorian Chapter President of the Australian Institute of Architects, to say a few words.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julie, and thank you so much, Lina, for that incredible presentation. I think it's worth mentioning that when the Institute of Architects was planning its national conference, which took place earlier this year in Sydney, Lina was our #1 pick and choice for the keynote speaker, which unfortunately wasn't able to be facilitated. So we're, of course, absolutely thrilled to be able to support this lecture tonight. And also the lecture that's happening later this week in Sydney, obviously in partnership with the University of Melbourne and also UTS. And finally, I'd just like to thank everybody so much for joining us tonight and ask you to again thank Lina for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephanie. Can I just remind you that Eurobooks is selling books by Lina out in the foyer still, if you're interested in looking at those. And before we close, I'd like to mention some of the excellent events we have coming up at the faculty. On display in the Design Gallery until the 29th of August is Retrofit. This exhibition explores how to upgrade and future-proof cities. Showcasing creative projects and initiatives across Melbourne, Retrofit is a call to action to transform cities to become thriving places now and in the coming century. On the 2nd of September, join us for Urban Wild Ecology. In this public Tresida lecture, renowned Japanese architects Mio Tsuneyama and Fuminori Nuosaku discuss the capitalist system of mass production and consumption that has led to environmental degradation, including ecosystem collapse and global warming. And coming up on the 25th of September is the launch of our next exhibition, Parts of Practice, considering the work of emerging architectural practices today, shifting the focus from singular outcomes and complete narratives to distinct and separate parts of architectural production. Head to our website for more details on these and all our upcoming events. Thanks again, and I wish you a good evening.